kite surfing across the bay, wind in their hair. A disturbance in the water caught their eye. Before they could react, the kite jerked violently, dragged under, tangled in lines and surrounded by bubbles. A sleek black form circled, eyeing its ensnared prey. The hunter of the deep had found an easy target. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin the ORCA ATTACK story, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe, click the like button, and leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. Now let's move on to the case. The morning sun glinted off the choppy waters of Telegraph Cove as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her life vest. At 25, she was the youngest tour guide at ORCA Dreams Adventures, but her passion for marine life and 3 years of experience had earned her the respect of both colleagues and tourists. She watched as her group for the day's whale-watching tour gathered on the dock, a mix of excitement and nervous energy palpable in the air. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah called out, her voice carrying over the gentle lapping of waves against the wooden pier. "Welcome to ORCA Dreams Adventures. I'm Sarah, and I'll be your guide today as we explore the magnificent waters of Johnstone Strait." She scanned the faces before her. A middle-aged couple clutching matching cameras, a family of 4 with 2 teenagers who seemed more interested in their phones than the scenery, and an elderly man whose eyes sparkled with anticipation. 7 tourists in total. A nice, manageable group for the 24-foot inflatable boat bobbing beside them. "Before we board, let's go over some safety procedures," Sarah began, her tone shifting to a more serious note. "Life jackets are mandatory at all times while on the water. Please ensure they're securely fastened." As she demonstrated the proper way to adjust the life vest, Sarah noticed a young woman at the back of the group. Unlike the others, she seemed tense, her knuckles white as she gripped the straps of her backpack. "Remember," Sarah continued, making eye contact with each person. "While orcas are incredible creatures, they are wild animals. We'll be observing them from a respectful distance. Under no circumstances should anyone attempt to touch or feed the wildlife. Are there any questions?" "Before we begin," the elderly man raised his hand. "How close will we get to the whales?" Sarah smiled. "Great question, sir. Regulations require us to maintain a distance of at least 200 meters from any orca. However, sometimes the whales themselves may choose to approach us. If that happens, we'll cut our engines and simply observe. Safety, for both us and the orcas, is our top priority." With no further questions, Sarah began helping her passengers aboard. The nervous young woman hesitated at the edge of the dock. "First time whale watching?" Sarah asked gently. The woman nodded, her eyes darting between Sarah and the inflatable boat. Is it safe?" Sarah placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Absolutely. I've been doing this for years, and we take every precaution. Plus, orcas are generally not aggressive towards humans. They're curious and intelligent creatures. I promise you're in for an unforgettable experience, Miss Emma Lawson," she replied, taking a deep breath. "Well, Emma, why don't you sit right up front with me? I'll make sure you're comfortable every step of the way." With a grateful smile, Emma allowed Sarah to help her onto the boat. Once everyone was settled, Sarah did one final equipment check before untying the mooring line. "All right, folks," she announced, starting the engine. "Let's go find some orcas." The boat glided out of the cove, the cool ocean breeze whipping through Sarah's ponytail. As they entered the open waters of Johnstone Strait, she felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. Every trip was different, every encounter unique. That was what she loved about this job, the unpredictability, the raw beauty of nature. "If you look to our left," Sarah called out over the hum of the engine, "you'll see Hansen Island. It's home to a research station that studies the northern resident orcas that frequent these waters." The teenage boy, momentarily drawn away from his phone, leaned over the side of the boat for a better look. "How many orcas live here?" he asked. Sarah grinned, always happy to share her knowledge. "Great question. The northern resident population has about 300 orcas divided into 16 pods. Each pod is like a family unit, led by the oldest female called the matriarch." As they cruised along, Sarah pointed out various landmarks and shared facts about the local ecosystem. The group's initial nervousness had given way to excitement, with even Emma relaxing enough to ask questions about orca behavior. About an hour into the trip, Sarah spotted a telltale spout of water in the distance. Her heart raced with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you look at 2 o'clock, I believe we have our first orca sighting of the day." A chorus of gasps and excited chatter erupted as the passengers strained to see. Sarah carefully maneuvered the boat, maintaining a respectful distance as she cut the engine. "Remember," she cautioned, "we're guests in their home. Let's observe quietly and enjoy this incredible moment." As if on cue, a massive dorsal fin broke the surface, followed by the sleek black and white body of a male orca. Sarah estimated he was at least 20 feet long, a mature bull in his prime. "Oh my God," Emma whispered beside her, eyes wide with wonder. "He's beautiful." Sarah nodded, her own breath caught in her throat. No matter how many times she saw these magnificent creatures, it never failed to move her. "That's likely the pod's male leader," Sarah explained softly. "See how tall his dorsal fin is? In male orcas, it can grow up to 6 feet high." As they watched, more fins appeared, smaller ones belonging to females and juveniles. The pod was surfacing to breathe, moving in a synchronized ballet that spoke of years of familial bonds. The elderly man fumbled with his camera, trying to capture the moment. "How many are there?" he asked, voice trembling with excitement. Sarah counted quickly. "I see at least 6, possibly more underwater. This looks like it might be the A5 pod. They're regular visitors to this area." For the next 20 minutes, the boat drifted quietly as the orcas swam around them. Sarah identified different individuals based on their unique markings, explaining how researchers used these patterns like fingerprints to track the population. As the pod began to move away, Sarah prepared to follow at a distance. But before she could start the engine, a smaller orca, likely a juvenile, broke away from the group. It swam closer to the boat, its curiosity evident in the way it lifted its head above water to look at them. "Oh wow," the teenage girl breathed, her phone forgotten as she leaned forward for a better look. Sarah felt a mix of exhilaration and unease. While it was incredible to see an orca this close, it was also unusual behavior. "Folks, please remain seated," she said calmly but firmly. "This young one seems curious, but we need to let it approach on its own terms." The juvenile orca circled the boat slowly, its dark eye seemingly fixed on the awestruck humans. Sarah's hand hovered near the ignition, ready to move if necessary. But for now, she allowed the encounter to unfold, knowing it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience for her passengers. Emma, who had been silent until now, suddenly grabbed Sarah's arm. Is this normal?" she asked, her earlier nervousness returning. Sarah patted her hand reassuringly. "It's not common, but it does happen. Juveniles can be quite curious. As long as we remain calm and don't make any sudden movements, we're perfectly safe." As if to prove her point, the young orca let out a gentle puff of air from its blowhole before diving beneath the surface. It reappeared on the other side of the boat, eliciting more gasps of wonder from the group. For several minutes, the juvenile continued its inspection of the strange visitors to its waters. Sarah kept a watchful eye on both the young whale and her passengers, ready to intervene if either showed signs of distress. Finally, with one last look at the boat, the juvenile turned and swam back to its pod, which had been waiting at a distance. A collective sigh of relief and awe swept through the group. The middle-aged woman wiped tears from her eyes while her husband reviewed the photos on his camera with shaking hands. "That was..." Emma started, then shook her head, seemingly at a loss for words. Sarah smiled, understanding completely. "Incredible, terrifying, life-changing?" "All of the above," Emma laughed, her earlier fear replaced by a glow of wonder. As Sarah prepared to start the engine and continue their tour, she felt a swell of pride and gratitude. This was why she did this job, to witness the raw beauty of nature and to share that experience with others. Little did she know that this encounter, magical as it was just the prelude to a far more intense and life-altering experience that awaited them all. As Sarah guided the inflatable boat through the calm waters of Johnstone Strait, the excitement from their earlier orca encounter still buzzed among the passengers. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting a shimmering path across the ocean's surface, Sarah kept her eyes trained on the horizon, searching for the telltale signs of ORCA activity. "Look!" shouted Thomas, the eager elderly man, pointing to their starboard side. "I think I see something." Sarah followed his gesture, her heart quickening as she spotted the distinctive black dorsal fin slicing through the water. "Good eye, Thomas," she called out, carefully maneuvering the boat. "Everyone, we've got company again. Remember to stay seated and keep your voices low." As the boat drew closer, Sarah cut the engine, allowing them to drift. The water around them came alive as a pod of orcas surfaced, their powerful bodies gleaming in the sunlight. Sarah recognized the pod immediately. It was the same group they had encountered earlier, including the curious juvenile. "It's the A5 pod again," Sarah explained, her voice hushed with reverence. "They must be following the salmon run. We're incredibly lucky to see them twice in one day." Emma, who had been gripping the side of the boat tightly, let out a shaky breath. "They're so much bigger up close," she murmured, a mix of awe and trepidation in her voice. Sarah nodded, understanding Emma's conflicting emotions. "The adult males can grow up to 32 feet long and weigh up to 6 tons, she said. "But don't worry, they're not interested in us. We're just observers in their world." As if to contradict her words, the large male orca they had seen earlier suddenly changed course, swimming directly towards their boat. Sarah tensed, her hand hovering near the ignition key. While she had never experienced aggression from orcas in all her years as a guide, she knew better than to take unnecessary risks. "Wow!" exclaimed the teenage boy, leaning dangerously far over the side of the boat for a better look. "He's coming right at us." "Jason, sit back, please," his mother urged, her voice tinged with worry. Sarah kept her tone calm but firm. "Everyone, please remain in your seats. Remember, we're guests in their habitat. Let's give them the respect and space they deserve." The massive orca glided past the boat, so close that Sarah could see the individual scratches on its dorsal fin. Its eye, intelligent and curious, seemed to study each person on board as it passed. The passengers held their breath collectively, caught between fear and wonder. As the male orca rejoined its pod, Sarah let out a silent sigh of relief. But her reprieve was short-lived. The juvenile orca they had seen earlier broke away from the group once again, its playful energy evident as it swam circles around the boat. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her seat. "What's it doing?" Sarah kept her voice steady, not wanting to alarm the group. "It's just curious. Juvenile orcas are known for their playful behavior. As long as we stay calm and don't make any sudden movements, we'll be fine." But even as she spoke the reassuring words, Sarah felt a twinge of unease. The juvenile's behavior was unusually bold, even for a curious youngster. She watched carefully as it dove beneath the boat, resurfacing on the other side with a splash that sent a spray of cold water over the passengers. "This is amazing," the teenage girl exclaimed, finally looking up from her phone to record the encounter. "Wait until I post this on TikTok." Her brother, Jason, leaned out again, trying to touch the water near where the orca had surfaced. "I wonder if I can pet it," he mused. "Absolutely not," Sarah said sharply, more forcefully than she had intended. She softened her tone but remained firm. "Touching or feeding wild animals is strictly prohibited. It's dangerous for both you and the orca." The juvenile continued its curious inspection, swimming ever closer to the boat. Sarah's unease grew. She had never seen an orca behave quite like this before. The rest of the pod had moved further, away, but this young one seemed reluctant to leave. Suddenly, the juvenile dived deep, disappearing from view. The water around the boat went eerily still. Sarah scanned the surface, trying to predict where it might resurface. The tension on the boat was palpable, a mix of excitement and growing apprehension. "Where did it go?" Thomas asked, his camera poised and ready. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the water beneath them surged upward. The juvenile orca breached the surface mere feet from the boat, its massive body clearing the water in a spectacular display of power and grace. Water cascaded off its sleek form as it hung suspended in the air for a breathtaking moment. Screams of surprise and delight erupted from the passengers. But Sarah's momentary awe quickly turned to alarm as she realized the orca's trajectory. It was going to come down dangerously close to the boat. "Hold on!" she shouted, gripping the wheel tightly. The orca crashed back into the water with tremendous force, sending a massive wave towards the small inflatable boat. Sarah tried to turn the boat into the wave, but she was a split second too late. The wall of water slammed into them, nearly capsizing the vessel. Passengers screamed and clutched at whatever they could grab. Water sloshed over the sides, soaking everyone. For a heart-stopping moment, Sarah thought they might flip, but miraculously the boat righted itself. "Is everyone okay?" Sarah called out, her heart pounding. She did a quick head count, relieved to see all 7 passengers still on board, wet and shaken but unharmed. Emma was hyperventilating, her earlier excitement replaced by sheer terror. "I want to go back," she gasped between breaths. "Please, can we go back now?" Sarah nodded, reaching out to squeeze Emma's shoulder reassuringly. "Of course. We've had quite enough excitement for one day." She turned to address the whole group. "I apologize for the scare, folks. This kind of behavior is extremely unusual. We'll head back to the harbor now." As Sarah prepared to start the engine, she noticed the juvenile orca circling back towards them. Its behavior was becoming increasingly erratic and unpredictable. She needed to get her passengers to safety, and quickly. But before she could turn the key, the orca dived again. This time, Sarah had a sinking feeling in her stomach. She knew what was coming. "Everyone hold on tight," she yelled, her voice sharp with urgency. "Brace yourselves." The water beneath them swelled ominously. Sarah had just enough time to grab Emma and pull her close before the juvenile orca surfaced directly beneath their boat. The world tilted crazily as the inflatable vessel was lifted partially out of the water on the orca's back. Time seemed to slow down. Sarah saw the looks of terror on her passengers' faces, heard their screams as if from a great distance. She saw the cold, dark water rushing up to meet them as the boat slid off the orca's smooth skin. Then, with a tremendous splash, they hit the water. The impact knocked the breath from Sarah's lungs. Cold water rushed over her, and for a moment she was disoriented. But her training kicked in, and she fought her way to the surface, gasping for air. Around her, the world was chaos. The overturned boat bobbed nearby, and her passengers flailed in the frigid water, their screams and cries for help piercing the air. The orca pod, seemingly startled by the commotion, had retreated to a safe distance, their dorsal fins still visible on the horizon. Sarah's mind raced. She had to act fast. Hypothermia would set in quickly in these cold waters. She needed to get everyone together, keep them calm, and signal for help. "Everyone," she shouted, treading water. "Swim to the boat. Use it for flotation. Stay together." As she helped the panicked tourists grasp onto the overturned vessel, Sarah's thoughts whirled. In all her years as a guide, nothing like this had ever happened. She had always seen orcas as magnificent, intelligent creatures, not as a threat. But now, as she looked at the terrified faces of her passengers, felt the icy grip of the ocean around her, and saw the ominous dorsal fins in the distance, Sarah realized that their whale-watching adventure had turned into a fight for survival. The real terror was just beginning. The frigid waters of Johnstone Strait lapped against Sarah's face as she treaded water, her eyes darting between her 7 panicked passengers and the overturned inflatable boat. The sudden silence after the chaos of the flip was eerie, broken only by the gasps and sputters of the tourists as they struggled to stay afloat. "Everyone stay calm," Sarah called out, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Grab onto the boat if you can. We need to stick together." She swam towards Emma, who was flailing wildly, her eyes wide with terror. "I can't swim." Emma choked out between gasps, her arms thrashing against the waves. Sarah reached her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "I've got you, Emma. Just hold on to me. We're going to be okay." As Sarah guided Emma to the overturned boat, she scanned the water for the others. The middle-aged couple, Mark and Linda, were clinging to each other, their faces pale with shock. Thomas, the elderly man, had managed to grab onto the boat's edge, but his grip looked tenuous. "Jason! Mia!" The panicked cry came from their mother, Susan, who was struggling to keep her head above water while searching frantically for her children. Sarah's heart clenched as she realized the 2 teenagers were nowhere in sight. "Hold on to Emma," she instructed Thomas, helping guide Emma's hands to the boat. Then, taking a deep breath, Sarah dove beneath the surface. The cold water stung her eyes as she searched the murky depths. Seconds felt like hours as she swam, lungs burning. Then, a flash of color caught her eye. Jason's red t-shirt. The boy was sinking, his movements sluggish. Sarah kicked hard, propelling herself towards him. She grabbed his arm, pulling him upwards with all her strength. They broke the surface with a splash, Jason coughing and sputtering. "I've got him!" Sarah shouted to Susan, whose relief was palpable even through her fear. As Sarah helped Jason to the boat, a scream pierced the air. "Help, over here!" It was Mia, the teenage girl. She had drifted away from the group, the current pulling her towards a cluster of jagged rocks jutting out of the water about 50 yards away. And to Sarah's horror, she saw a large black dorsal fin cutting through the water, heading straight for Mia. "Oh my God," Linda gasped, following Sarah's gaze. "Is that—" Sarah didn't wait to answer. "Everyone, hold on to the boat. Do not let go, no matter what," she commanded. Then, without hesitation, she dove back into the water, swimming, with powerful strokes towards Mia. The girl's screams grew more frantic as she saw the orca approaching. It was the juvenile from before, its curiosity now a terrifying threat in their vulnerable state. "Mia!" Sarah shouted as she swam. "Stay calm. I'm coming." But the orca reached Mia first. Sarah's heart nearly stopped as she saw the massive creature circle the terrified girl, its dorsal fin slicing through the water mere feet from her. "Don't move, Mia," Sarah called out, her voice hoarse from exertion and fear. "Stay as still as you can." Mia was sobbing, her body rigid with fear as the juvenile orca continued to circle her. Sarah could see its eye watching Mia intently, curiosity evident in its movements. But curiosity from a creature this size could be deadly. Sarah was just yards away when the orca suddenly dived. The water went still for a heart-stopping moment. Then, without warning, the juvenile breached, its enormous body launching out of the water right next to Mia. The girl screamed as she was buffeted by the splash, pushed underwater momentarily by the force. Sarah reached her just as Mia resurfaced, coughing and crying. "I've got you," Sarah said, wrapping an arm around the girl's waist. "We're going to swim back to the others now. Nice and slow, okay?" As they began to swim, Sarah kept a wary eye on the juvenile orca. It hadn't left, continuing to circle them with what seemed like playful curiosity. But there was nothing playful about their situation. "Why is it doing this?" Mia sobbed as they swam. Sarah tried to keep her voice calm. "It's just curious. Orcas are intelligent and playful creatures. It probably doesn't realize how dangerous its behavior is for us." They were halfway back to the overturned boat when Sarah heard a collective gasp from the group. She turned to see the rest of the orca pod approaching, their dorsal fins cutting through the water in a line that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Sarah!" Emma's panicked voice carried across the water. "They're coming closer." Sarah quickened, their pace, her muscles screaming with the effort of swimming while supporting Mia. "Everyone, remain calm," she called out, trying to keep her own voice steady. "Remember, orcas are not typically aggressive towards humans. We just need to stay still and let them pass." But as the pod drew nearer, Sarah's certainty wavered. This was not normal orca behavior. In all her years as a guide, she had never seen them act this way. The cold reality of their situation began to sink in. They were stranded in frigid waters, surrounded by some of the ocean's apex predators, with no immediate hope of rescue. As they finally reached the overturned boat, Sarah helped Mia grasp the edge. "Hold on tight," she instructed, doing a quick check of the others. They were all visibly shaken, their lips blue from the cold but alive. The orca pod had formed a loose circle around them, their massive bodies gliding through the water with effortless grace. The juvenile that had caused their predicament continued its close passes, each one sending waves of panic through the group. "What do we do?" Mark asked, his voice quavering. "We can't just stay here." Sarah took a deep breath, forcing herself to think clearly. "We need to signal for help. Our emergency beacon was on the boat, but it should have activated when we capsized. Help will be on the way." As if on cue, the faint whir of a helicopter sounded in the distance. A collective sigh of relief went through the group. "See?" Sarah said, allowing a small smile. They're coming for us. We just need to hold on a little longer. But their relief was short-lived. The juvenile orca, perhaps, excited by the new sound, suddenly charged towards the boat. Before anyone could react, it rammed into the side, nearly capsizing it again. Screams erupted as everyone struggled to maintain their grip. Water sloshed over them, the cold stealing their breath away. "Hold on!" Sarah yelled, reaching out to steady Emma, who had nearly lost her grip. The juvenile circled back, its eye fixed on them with what Sarah could only describe as mischievous intent. It was treating them like toys, unaware of the deadly danger it posed. The helicopter was drawing closer, but Sarah realized with growing dread that it might not arrive in time. The juvenile was preparing for another pass, and this time, Sarah wasn't sure the boat would remain upright. In that moment, as she looked into the terrified eyes of her passengers, felt the icy grip of the water around her, and saw the massive orcas circling ever closer, Sarah understood the true meaning of fear. This was nature in its rawest form, beautiful, powerful, and utterly indifferent to human life. The juvenile orca dove, disappearing beneath the surface. Sarah tightened her grip on the boat, bracing for impact. As she did, she caught Emma's eye. The young woman who had been so nervous at the start of their trip now looked at Sarah with a mix of terror and desperate hope. "Sarah," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the lapping waves and the approaching helicopter. "Are we going to die here?" Before Sarah could answer, the water beneath them surged upward. The juvenile orca's massive form erupted from the depths, its body slamming into the underside of the boat with tremendous force. The world tilted, water rushed in, and Sarah's last coherent thought before they were plunged into chaos once more was a desperate plea to whatever forces might be listening. "Please, let us survive this." As the icy water closed over her head, Sarah knew that their ordeal was far from over. The real fight for survival was just beginning. The world beneath the surface of Johnstone Strait was a cacophony of bubbles, thrashing limbs, and the muffled screams of panic. Sarah fought against the disorientation, her lungs burning as she kicked towards what she hoped was the surface. Her fingers brushed against something solid, the hull of the overturned boat, and she used it to guide herself upward. She burst through the surface with a desperate gasp, blinking water from her eyes as she frantically searched for her passengers. The scene before her was chaos incarnate. "Everyone," Sarah shouted, her voice hoarse, "group together. Use the boat for support." Through the spray and waves, she could make out the forms of her passengers. Some were clinging to the overturned hull, while others flailed in the water nearby. The orcas circled them, their dorsal fins cutting through the water like ominous black sails. Sarah swam to Emma first, the young woman's face a mask of terror, as she struggled to keep her head above water. "I've got you," Sarah assured her, helping Emma grasp the boat's edge. "Just hold on tight." One by one, Sarah rounded up her passengers, guiding them to the relative safety of the overturned hull. The elderly Thomas was last, his movement sluggish from the cold water. Sarah's heart raced as she swam to him, acutely aware of a large orca shadow passing beneath them. "Almost there, Thomas," she encouraged, supporting him as they made their way back to the boat. "You're doing great." Once everyone was accounted for and holding on to the boat, Sarah took stock of their situation. The hull bobbed precariously in the waves, threatening to roll with each swell. The orca pod continued to circle, their curiosity unabated by the humans' distress. "Is everyone okay?" Sarah asked, scanning the group. "Any injuries?" A chorus of shaky affirmations met her ears, punctuated by chattering teeth and suppressed sobs. The cold was already taking its toll. Sarah could see the blue tinge to their lips, feel the numbness creeping into her own extremities. "Listen to me," Sarah said, her voice firm despite her own fear. "We need to stay calm and conserve energy. The emergency beacon on the boat should have activated when we capsized. Help will be here soon. But what about them?" Jason, the teenage boy, asked, his eyes wide as he watched an orca surface nearby, exhaling a misty spout. Sarah swallowed hard. "We just need to stay still and quiet. They're curious, but they're not trying to hurt us." Even as she spoke the words, Sarah wasn't entirely convinced. The juvenile orca that had caused their predicament was still circling close, its behavior erratic and unpredictable. She had never seen orcas act like this before, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. Sarah, Mark, the middle-aged man, called, "Out." "I think Linda's in trouble." Sarah turned to see Linda, Mark's wife, her eyes unfocused and her grip on the boat weakening. Hypothermia was setting in fast. "Linda, stay with us," Sarah said urgently, moving closer. "Mark, I need you to hold her tight. Keep her as much out of the water as you can." As Sarah helped position Linda more securely, a shadow fell over them. She looked up to see the juvenile orca approaching, its massive form gliding effortlessly through the water. The group fell silent, terror paralyzing them as the creature drew near. It passed so close that Sarah could have reached out and touched its slick, black skin. Its eye, intelligent and curious, seemed to study them as it swam by. For a moment, the only sound was the lapping of waves and the collective held breath of the group. Then, without warning, the juvenile dived, its flukes sending a spray of icy water over them as it disappeared beneath the surface. "Where did it go?" Mia whimpered, her eyes darting around frantically. Sarah's instincts screamed danger. "Everyone, hold on tight," she yelled, just as the water beneath them surged. Upward, the juvenile breached mere feet from the boat, its massive body clearing the water in a spectacular display of power. For a suspended moment, time seemed to stop as the orca hung in the air, water cascading off its sleek form. Then gravity took hold and it crashed back down, sending a massive wave towards them. Screams erupted as the wave hit, nearly washing several of them off the boat. Sarah grabbed Emma with one hand and Thomas with the other, fighting to keep them all connected to their lifeline. "Don't let go," Sarah shouted over the chaos. "Whatever happens, don't let go of the boat." As the water settled, Sarah did another quick head count. Everyone was still there, soaked and terrified, but alive. The juvenile orca surfaced nearby, exhaling a misty spout as if pleased with its performance. "Why is it doing this?" Susan sobbed, clutching her children close. Sarah shook her head at a loss for words. This behavior was so far outside her experience that she couldn't even begin to explain it. The orcas she knew were intelligent, sometimes curious about boats but never aggressive like this. A new sound cut through the air, the distant whir of rotors. Sarah's heart leapt. "Do you hear that?" she called out. "It's a helicopter. Help is coming." The sound of hope, however, seemed to agitate the orcas further. The pod began to circle tighter, their movements becoming more frenzied. The juvenile, emboldened by its earlier antics, approached the boat again. "No, no, no," Sarah muttered, watching its approach with growing dread. "Please, just leave us alone." But the juvenile showed no signs of backing off. It swam directly towards them, its speed picking up as it neared. "Brace yourselves," Sarah yelled just as the orca rammed into the side of the boat. The impact sent shockwaves through the hull, nearly capsizing them again. Water sloshed over the sides, and Sarah felt her grip slipping. Beside her, Emma lost her hold entirely, slipping beneath the surface with a strangled cry. Without hesitation, Sarah dove after her. The cold water stung her eyes as she searched the murky depths. She caught a glimpse of Emma's flailing form and kicked hard, propelling herself forward. Just as she reached out to grab Emma's arm, a massive shadow passed between them. Sarah's heart nearly stopped as she realized what it was. One of the adult orcas had dived beneath them. For a terrifying moment, she lost sight of Emma in the orca's wake. Then mercifully, she felt fabric beneath her fingers and pulled hard, swimming for the surface with every ounce of strength she had left. They broke through together, Emma coughing and sputtering as Sarah guided her back to the boat. The others helped pull them up, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and renewed fear. "Thank you," Emma gasped between ragged breaths. I thought, "It's okay," Sarah reassured her, even as she scanned the water warily. "You're safe now." But safe was a relative term. The orcas were still circling, the juvenile's erratic behavior growing more concerning by the minute. The helicopter was drawing closer, but Sarah feared it might not arrive in time. "Listen to me, everyone," Sarah said, her voice low and urgent. When the helicopter gets here, they'll likely lower a rescue swimmer. We need to be ready. Stay calm, follow their instructions, and whatever you do not try to swim away from the boat. Understood? A chorus of shaky affirmations met her words. Sarah could see the hope warring with fear in their eyes. They were putting their trust in her, looking to her for guidance and protection. The weight of that responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. As the sound of the helicopter grew louder, Sarah found herself face to face with the harsh reality of their situation. They were at the mercy of nature, beautiful, powerful, and utterly indifferent to their plight. The orcas, magnificent creatures that she had always admired from a distance, now represented a very real threat to their survival. The juvenile orca surfaced again, closer than ever. Its eye met Sarah's, and in that moment, she saw not malice, but an almost childlike curiosity. It didn't understand the danger it posed, the terror it was inflicting. It was simply playing, unaware that its game could have deadly consequences. As the helicopter appeared on the horizon, its rhythmic thumping, a promise of rescue, Sarah steeled herself for what was to come. The real test of their survival was just beginning, and she knew that every decision, every action in the next few minutes could mean the difference between life and death. The icy water lapped at her chin, the orcas circled ever closer, and the helicopter drew near. Sarah took a deep breath, tightened her grip on the boat, and prepared to face whatever came next. Their ordeal was far from over, but she was determined to see every single one of her passengers through it safely, no matter the cost. The rhythmic thump of helicopter blades grew louder, cutting through the sound of lapping waves and chattering teeth. Sarah squinted against the spray, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and apprehension as she spotted the Coast Guard helicopter approaching. "It's here," she shouted over the noise, her voice hoarse from the cold and exertion. "Everyone stay calm and hold on tight." The group clung to the overturned boat, their faces a mix of relief and fear as they watched the helicopter draw near. But their hope was tempered by the continued presence of the orca pod, still circling ominously. As the helicopter hovered above them, its downdraft creating a maelstrom of waves and spray, Sarah saw a figure preparing to descend. A rescue swimmer, clad in a bright orange dry suit, was being lowered into the churning waters. "Help is coming," Sarah reassured her shivering passengers. "Just a little longer, everyone." But the commotion seemed to agitate the orcas further. The pod tightened its circle, dorsal fins cutting through the water with increased speed. The juvenile, which had been the cause of their predicament, breached nearby, its massive body clearing the water in a spectacular display that sent waves crashing over the stranded group. "Oh God," Emma whimpered, her grip on the boat tightening. "They're getting closer." Sarah's eyes darted between the approaching rescue swimmer and the increasingly agitated orcas. She knew they were in a race against time and nature. The rescue swimmer hit the water about 50 yards from their position. He unclipped from the line and began swimming towards them with powerful strokes. But before he could reach them, the largest male orca in the pod surfaced directly in his path. "No," Sarah gasped, watching in horror as the massive creature's dorsal fin cut through the water, heading straight for the swimmer. The rescue swimmer, trained for all manner of maritime emergencies, hesitated for just a moment before changing course, trying to circle around the orca. But the intelligent creature seemed to anticipate his moves, staying between him and the stranded group. Up in the helicopter, Sarah could see frantic activity as the crew assessed the situation. She knew they were facing an unprecedented scenario. How do you rescue people from the water when a pod of orcas stands in your way? "What's happening?" Thomas asked, his voice weak from the cold. "Why isn't he coming to us?" Sarah swallowed, hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "The orcas are blocking his path, but don't worry, the Coast Guard is trained for difficult rescues. They'll find a way." Even as she spoke, Sarah wasn't sure she believed her own words. In all her years as a tour guide, in all the rescue scenarios she'd trained for, nothing had prepared her for this. The juvenile orca, seemingly excited by the new presence in the water, suddenly dove. Sarah's heart leapt into her throat as she realized what was about to happen. "Watch out!" She screamed toward the rescue swimmer, but her voice was lost in the noise of the helicopter and the wind. The juvenile breached directly beside the swimmer, its massive body sending up a spray of water. The force of its landing created a wave that washed over the man, momentarily pushing him under. When the swimmer resurfaced, he began signaling urgently to the helicopter. Sarah watched, her stomach sinking as he was winched back up, leaving them still stranded in the icy waters. "They're leaving us?" Mia cried, panic evident in her voice. "No, they're not leaving," Sarah assured her, even as doubt gnawed at her. "They're probably just regrouping, coming up with a new plan." As if confirming her words, a voice suddenly crackled to life nearby. Sarah realized with a start that there was a waterproof radio attached to the boat, miraculously still functioning. "This is Coast Guard rescue helicopter. Can anyone hear me? Over." Sarah lunged for the radio, nearly losing her grip on the boat in the process. Yes, we hear you. This is Sarah Mitchell, tour guide with Orca Dreams Adventures. We have 7 passengers in the water. Our boat has capsized. We need immediate assistance." There was a moment of static before the voice responded. "Roger that, Sarah. We see you. Be advised, we're unable to approach due to ORCA activity. We're calling in additional resources. Hang tight." Sarah's heart sank at the news, but she forced herself to sound confident as she replied. "Understood. Please hurry. We have people at risk of severe hypothermia." As she updated the group on the situation, Sarah could see the hope fading from their eyes, replaced by a growing desperation. "We can't stay in this water much longer," Mark said, his teeth chattering violently. "We'll freeze to death before help arrives." Sarah knew he was right. The frigid waters of the Johnstone Strait were unforgiving, and they had already been exposed far too long. She could see the signs of hypothermia setting in: blue lips, uncontrollable shivering, slurred speech. They needed to get out of the way. Water, and soon. An idea began to form in Sarah's mind. It was risky, potentially disastrous, but it might be their only chance. "Listen to me, everyone," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We need to try and right the boat." "What? How?" Jason asked, looking at her with wide eyes. Sarah took a deep breath. "If we can flip it over, we might be able to climb in. It'll get us out of the water, at least partially. It's risky, we'll be vulnerable while we're doing it, but I think it's our best shot." The group exchanged nervous glances, but no one argued. They all knew their situation was growing more desperate by the minute. "Okay," Sarah continued, "here's what we're going to do. On my count, we're all going to push down on this side of the boat. The goal is to flip it in one coordinated move. Ready?" A chorus of shaky affirmatives met her ears. Sarah took one last look around, noting the positions of the orcas. The pod was still circling, but they seemed to have backed off slightly, perhaps put off by the noise and commotion of the helicopter. "All right, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Push." With a collective grunt of effort, the group shoved down, on the edge of the boat. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the boat began to tilt. "Keep pushing," Sarah yelled, straining with all her might. Water sloshed over them as the boat's momentum built. Suddenly, with a great splash, it flipped, righting itself in the choppy waves. "We did it," Emma cried out, a glimmer of hope returning to her eyes. But their victory was short-lived. The sudden movement seemed to renew the orca's interest. The juvenile in particular sped towards them, its dorsal fin cutting through the water with alarming speed. "Quick, into the boat!" Sarah shouted, helping Emma scramble over the edge. One by one, she helped her passengers clamber into the relative safety of the boat. Thomas was last, his movements slow and clumsy from the cold. Sarah was just helping him over the edge when she felt something brush against her leg beneath the water. She looked down and found herself staring into the eye of the juvenile orca, so close she could see her own terrified reflection in its glossy surface. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Sarah was acutely aware of her vulnerability, of how easily this curious, playful creature could end her life without even meaning to. Then the moment passed and the juvenile dove, disappearing beneath the waves. Sarah wasted no time, hauling herself into the boat with the last of her strength. As they huddled together in the waterlogged vessel, shivering and exhausted, Sarah knew they weren't out of danger yet. The boat was taking on water and the orcas were still circling. But they had bought themselves some time, a fighting chance at survival. The radio crackled to life again. "Sarah, this is Coast Guard. We've got a marine rescue vessel en route to your position. ETA 20 minutes, how are you holding up?" Sarah grabbed the radio with shaking hands. "We've managed to right the boat and we're all out of the water for now. But we're taking on water and the orcas are still very active around us. Please hurry." "Roger that. Hang in there, help is on the way." As Sarah relayed the news to her passengers, she saw a mix of relief and lingering fear on their faces. They had made it this far, but the ordeal wasn't over yet. The orcas were still out there, their intentions unknowable. And the cold, the bone-deep cold that had settled into all of them, was a silent, deadly threat. Sarah looked out over the choppy waters at the circling fins and the distant shape of the approaching rescue boat. They were caught between two powerful forces: human ingenuity racing to save them, and nature's raw, indifferent power surrounding them. As the juvenile orca breached again nearby, sending spray over the boat, Sarah steeled herself for whatever might come next. The final act of their survival drama was about to unfold. The inflatable boat bobbed precariously in the choppy waters of Johnstone Strait, its occupants huddled together for warmth and comfort. Sarah Mitchell, the young tour guide, scanned the horizon anxiously, searching for any sign of the promised rescue vessel. The Coast Guard helicopter still hovered overhead, a reassuring presence but unable to assist directly due to the unpredictable behavior of the orca pod. "How much longer?" Emma whispered, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. The young woman, who had been so nervous at the start of their trip, now clung to Sarah like a lifeline. Sarah checked her watch, grimacing as she realized it had stopped working, likely damaged by the water. "Soon," she assured Emma, hoping her voice sounded more confident than she felt. The Coast Guard said 20 minutes. "It can't be much longer, now." As if in response to her words, the juvenile orca that had been the cause of their predicament suddenly breached nearby, its massive body clearing the water in a spectacular display of power and grace. The boat rocked violently in the resulting wake, eliciting screams of fear from the already terrified passengers. "Everyone, hold on!" Sarah shouted, gripping the sides of the boat. Water sloshed over the edges, further soaking their already drenched bodies. The cold seemed to seep into their very bones, sapping what little strength they had left. Thomas, the elderly man, groaned softly. His face had taken on an alarming bluish tinge, his movements slow and uncoordinated. Sarah recognized the advanced signs of hypothermia and knew they were running out of time. "Thomas, stay with me," she urged, moving closer to him. "Tell me about your grandchildren again. How many did you say you have?" Thomas blinked slowly, his eyes unfocused. "Grandchildren," he mumbled. "Yes, your grandchildren," Sarah pressed, trying to keep him engaged. "You were telling me about them earlier, remember? Before we saw the orcas." "Oh, yes," Thomas said, a faint smile crossing his lips. 4. 2 boys, 2 girls. The youngest just started kindergarten. As Thomas continued to speak, his voice growing slightly stronger, Sarah caught Mark's eye. The middle-aged man nodded in understanding, moving to Thomas's other side to help keep him warm and talking. A sudden commotion in the water drew Sarah's attention. The large male orca, easily recognizable by its towering dorsal fin, was charging towards their boat with alarming speed. "Brace yourselves," Sarah yelled, her heart pounding in her chest. The orca dived at the last moment, passing directly beneath their small vessel. For a terrifying second, Sarah thought it might surface under them, capsizing the boat once again. But it resurfaced on the other side, its massive tail flukes sending up a spray of icy water that drenched them all. Mia, the teenage girl, burst into tears. "Why are they doing this?" she sobbed. "I thought orcas didn't attack humans." Sarah swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. "They're not attacking us, not really," she said, trying to keep her voice calm and reassuring. "This isn't normal behavior. They seem curious, maybe even playful. But they don't understand how dangerous their actions are for us." "Playful?" Jason, Mia's brother, scoffed. "They're toying with us like a cat with a mouse." Before Sarah could respond, the radio crackled to life. "Sarah, this is Coast Guard Vessel Horizon. We're approaching your position from the southeast. Do you have a visual? Over." Sarah's heart leapt as she scrambled for the radio. Horizon, this is Sarah. We don't have a visual yet, but we're looking. Please hurry. We have a man with severe hypothermia. Over. Roger that, Sarah. We're pushing our engines to the max. Hang in there. Out. As Sarah relayed the news to the group, a collective sigh of relief went through the boat. Help was close. They just needed to hold on a little longer, but the orcas seemed to sense the approaching rescue. The pod's behavior became more agitated, their circles tightening around the small boat. The juvenile in particular grew bolder, swimming ever closer with each pass. Sarah watched its approach with growing dread. The juvenile's eye, intelligent and curious, seemed fixed on their boat. She could almost see the wheels turning in its mind, the playful impulse building. No, 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 she muttered under her breath. Please, just leave us alone. But the juvenile showed no signs of backing off. It swam directly towards them, picking up speed as it neared. Everyone, hold on tight, Sarah yelled, just as the orca rammed into the side of the boat. The impact sent shockwaves through the inflatable hull. Water surged over the sides and, for a heart-stopping moment, Sarah thought they might capsize again. But somehow, miraculously, the boat stayed upright. Is everyone okay? Sarah called out, doing a quick head count. 7 pale, terrified faces looked back at her. They were all still there, still alive, but for how much longer? The juvenile orca circled back, clearly gearing up for another pass. Sarah's mind raced, desperately seeking a solution. They couldn't take another hit like that. The boat was already taking on water, and their strength was fading fast. In that moment of desperation, an idea struck her. It was risky, potentially disastrous, but it might be their only chance. Listen to me, Sarah said, her voice low and urgent. When the orca comes back, we need to make as much noise as possible. Shout, scream, slap the water, anything to startle it. Are you crazy? Susan, Jason, and Mia's mother gasped. Won't that just make it angry? Sarah shook her head. Orcas have sensitive hearing. A sudden burst of noise might be enough to drive it away, at least temporarily. It's our best shot. The others exchanged nervous glances but nodded in agreement. They all knew their situation was growing more desperate by the minute. Okay, Sarah continued. Wait for my signal, and whatever happens, don't stop making noise until I say so. Ready? A chorus of shaky affirmatives met her ears. Sarah took one last look around, noting the positions of the orcas. The juvenile was circling back, building up speed for another charge. Get ready, Sarah warned, tensing as she watched the orcas approach. Wait for it. Wait for it. Now. The air erupted with a cacophony of human voices. Screams, shouts, and wild yells pierced the air, accompanied by the frantic slapping of hands against the water in the boat's hull. The noise was deafening, desperate, primal. The effect on the juvenile orca was immediate and dramatic. It flinched visibly, veering off course at the last second. Its massive body twisted in the water as it dove, clearly startled by the sudden auditory assault. Keep it up, Sarah yelled over the din, her own voice hoarse from shouting. The other orcas in the pod reacted to the noise as well, their tight circles around the boat loosening as they moved away from the source of the commotion. For a moment it seemed like Sarah's desperate plan might actually work. But then, just as hope began to bloom, the large male orca, the pod's leader, surged towards them. Its massive dorsal fin cut through the water like a blade, a silent promise of the raw power beneath the surface. Oh God, Sarah breathed, her voice lost in the continued shouting of her passengers. She knew with a bone-deep certainty that if this orca hit their boat, it would be the end. Time seemed to slow as the orca approached. Sarah could see every detail. The scars on its dorsal fin, the contrasting patterns of black and white on its sleek body, the intelligent eye fixed upon them with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. In that moment, as she stared into the eye of one of nature's most magnificent and deadly predators, Sarah felt a profound sense of her own insignificance. They were so small, so fragile in the face of this ancient, powerful creature. All their technology, all their knowledge meant nothing here in the orca's domain. The male orca was mere yards away now, showing no signs of slowing or veering off course. Sarah braced herself for impact, her mind racing through a desperate litany of apologies, to her passengers for failing them, to her family for the pain. Her loss would cause them to the orcas themselves for whatever human action might have triggered this unusual behavior. And then, just when all seemed lost, a new sound cut through the chaos. The deep, resonant horn of a ship. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes widening as she saw the Coast Guard vessel Horizon bearing down on them, its horn blaring a continuous warning. The effect on the orcas was electric. The entire pod, including the charging male, dove as one, disappearing beneath the waves in a flurry of flukes and spray. The waters around their small boat suddenly, blessedly, emptied of dorsal fins. "They're here!" Sarah shouted, her voice cracking with relief. "Everyone, stay calm. Help is here." As the Horizon drew alongside their battered inflatable, Sarah saw rescue personnel preparing to bring them aboard. The nightmare was almost over, but even as relief flooded through her, Sarah couldn't shake the memory of that final moment. The eye of the male orca, so intelligent, so alien, meeting hers. She had always known that orcas were apex predators, but she had never truly understood what that meant until today. As she helped her exhausted, hypothermic passengers onto the safety of the Coast Guard vessel, Sarah knew that this experience had changed her forever. The beauty and terror of nature, the thin line between life and death, the profound respect and fear commanded by creatures like the orcas. These were lessons she would carry with her always. The rescue team worked quickly, wrapping the survivors in warm blankets and administering emergency first aid. Thomas, the elderly man, was rushed to the ship's medical bay, his condition critical but stable. As the Horizon began its journey back to shore, Sarah stood at the railing, her eyes fixed on the spot where their harrowing ordeal had unfolded. The waters were calm now, showing no sign of the drama that had played out upon them. In the distance, she saw a flash of black and white, the orca pod, moving on to other hunting grounds. A Coast Guard officer approached her, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. "Miss Mitchell, I'm Lieutenant Cooper. We'll need to debrief you when we reach." "Sure, but for now, why don't you get some rest? You've been through quite an ordeal." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully, its warmth seeping into her cold hands. "Thank you, Lieutenant, but I don't think I'll be able to rest just yet. There's so much to process, Lieutenant." Cooper nodded understandingly. "I've been with the Coast Guard for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you folks went through today. Those orcas, it's not normal behavior." "No," Sarah agreed, her voice soft. "It wasn't normal at all. I've been leading tours for years, and I never imagined." She trailed off, unable to find the words to express the mix of awe, terror, and lingering disbelief that swirled within her. "Well," Lieutenant Cooper said, patting her shoulder gently, "you showed remarkable courage and leadership out there. Your actions likely saved lives today." As the officer walked away, Sarah turned back to the ocean. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, peaceful, a stark contrast to the terror they had just endured. Sarah took a sip of her coffee, letting its warmth spread through her. She knew that the coming days and weeks would be difficult. There would be questions to answer, reports to file, trauma to process. But for now, in this moment, she allowed herself to simply be grateful for survival, for rescue, and for the profound reminder of nature's power and mystery that she had received. As the Horizon carried them towards home and safety, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She would continue to share her love of the ocean and its creatures with others, but with a new level of respect and caution. The events of this day would serve as a constant reminder of the delicate balance between humans and the wild, untamed forces of nature. The orcas may have disappeared beneath the waves, but their impact would ripple through Sarah's life and the lives of her passengers for years to come. This was not the end of their story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one marked by a deeper understanding of the awesome, terrifying beauty of the natural world. The Coast Guard vessel Horizon cut through the choppy waters of Johnstone Strait, its powerful engines driving it towards the small group of survivors clinging to their battered inflatable boat. On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Jessica Reeves gripped the ship's wheel tightly, her eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before her. "Steady as she goes," she called out to her crew. "Prepare for rescue operations, and keep an eye on those orcas." As they drew closer, the full scale of the situation became apparent. The inflatable boat was barely staying afloat, its occupants huddled together, pale and shaking. But it was the pod of orcas circling the boat that sent a chill down Jessica's spine. In all her years with the Coast Guard, she had never seen anything like this. "Deploy the RHIB," she ordered, referring to the rigid hull inflatable boat used for close-quarter rescues. "But tell them to approach with extreme caution. Those orcas are unpredictable." On the inflatable boat, Sarah Mitchell felt a surge of hope as she spotted the approaching Coast Guard vessel. "Look!" she shouted to her passengers, her voice hoarse from cold and exhaustion. "Help is here." The group stirred, lifting their heads to see the horizon bearing down on them. But their relief was short-lived as the juvenile orca that had been tormenting them suddenly breached nearby, sending a spray of icy water over the boat. "Hold on!" Sarah yelled, gripping the sides of the boat as it rocked violently. "Just a little longer, everyone. We're almost safe." As the horizon drew closer, its horn blared, a deep, resonant sound that cut through the air. The effect on the orcas was immediate. The pod dove as one, disappearing beneath the waves in a flurry of flukes and spray. On the horizon's deck, a flurry of activity erupted as the crew prepared for the rescue. The RHIB was lowered into the water, manned by a team of experienced rescue swimmers. "Approach with caution," Lieutenant Commander Reeves' voice crackled over their radios. "Those survivors are in bad shape and we don't know when those orcas might return. Get them out of there as fast as you can." In the RHIB, Petty Officer, First Class Michael Torres nodded grimly. He had performed countless rescues in his career, but this one had his adrenaline pumping like never before. As they sped towards the survivors, he kept one eye on the water, watching for any sign of the orca's return. Back on the inflatable boat, Sarah was doing her best to prepare her passengers for rescue. "Okay, everyone," she said, her voice shaking with cold and exhaustion. "When the rescue team gets here, we need to move quickly and calmly. They'll tell us exactly what to do. Just follow their instructions and we'll be out of here in no time." Emma, the young woman who had been so terrified throughout their ordeal, looked at Sarah with wide, grateful eyes. "We wouldn't have made it without you," she said softly. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. There would be time for emotions later. Right now, they needed to focus on getting to safety. "We're not out of this yet," she replied, squeezing Emma's hand. "Stay alert, okay?" As the RHIB pulled alongside their boat, Petty Officer Torres called out, "Coast Guard, we're here to help. Is anyone injured?" Sarah responded immediately. "We have an elderly man with severe hypothermia. Everyone else is cold and exhausted, but no major injuries." Torres nodded, his experienced eyes quickly assessing the situation. "Okay, we're going to transfer you to our boat one at a time. We'll start with the hypothermic patient." "What's his name?" "Thomas," Sarah replied. "He's barely conscious." As the rescue team carefully maneuvered Thomas onto their boat, Sarah kept a watchful eye on the water around them. The orcas had disappeared, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching and waiting. One by one, the survivors were transferred to the RHIB. Sarah insisted on being the last to leave, helping each of her passengers make the precarious move between the boats. As Emma, the last before her, was safely aboard the rescue boat, Sarah felt a sudden movement in the water beneath them. "Look out!" she screamed, just as the juvenile orca breached beside their boat, its massive body sending up a spray of water that drenched them all. Petty Officer Torres reacted instantly, reaching out to grab Sarah's arm and yanking her into the RHIB just as the orca's tail came down, smashing into the inflatable boat where she had been standing moments before. "Go, go, go!" Torres shouted to his team, and the RHIB's engine roared to life, speeding them away from the danger and towards the safety of the horizon. As they approached the larger vessel, Sarah looked back. The inflatable boat was gone, dragged under by the orca's powerful tail slap. And there, watching them go, was the entire pod, their dorsal fins cutting through the water in an eerie, silent farewell. Aboard the horizon, a flurry of activity greeted the rescued group. Medical personnel swarmed around them, wrapping them in warm blankets and assessing their conditions. Thomas was immediately rushed to the ship's medical bay, his condition critical but stable. Sarah found herself guided to a seat, a steaming cup of hot chocolate pressed into her hands. The warmth seeping into her frozen fingers was almost painful, but blessedly welcome. Lieutenant Commander Reeves approached, her face a mix of concern and admiration. "Miss Mitchell? I'm Lieutenant Commander Jessica Reeves. How are you holding up?" Sarah looked up, her mind still reeling from the events of the past few hours. I'm not sure," she answered honestly. "It doesn't quite feel real yet." Reeves nodded understandingly. "That's normal after what you've been through. You showed incredible courage out there. Your quick thinking and leadership likely saved lives today." Sarah shook her head, feeling overwhelmed. "I was just doing my job. If I had done it better, we wouldn't have been in that situation in the first place." "Don't do that to yourself," Reeves said firmly. "What happened out there was unprecedented. No one could have predicted or prepared for it. You kept your group alive in an impossible situation. That's what matters." As the horizon began its journey back to shore, Sarah found herself drawn to the railing, her eyes fixed on the spot where their harrowing ordeal had unfolded. The waters were calm now, showing no sign of the drama that had played out upon them. In the distance, she saw a flash of black and white, the orca pod, moving on to other hunting grounds. Emma appeared beside her, a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "How are you doing?" she asked softly. Sarah turned to look at the young woman, seeing the mix of exhaustion and lingering fear in her eyes. "I'm okay," she replied. "How about you?" Emma managed a small smile. "I'm alive thanks to you. I don't know how to thank you, Sarah. You saved us all." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. The enormity of what they had been through was starting to sink in. "We saved each other," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Every single one of you showed incredible strength today." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun begin to set over the water. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange and pink, a beautiful end to a terrifying day. "I keep seeing them," Emma said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every time I close my eyes, I see those orcas circling us. Their eyes, they seem so intelligent, so aware." Sarah nodded, understanding completely. Orcas are incredibly intelligent creatures. They're not typically aggressive towards humans. What happened today? It wasn't normal. Then why? Emma asked, turning to face Sarah. "Why did they do it?" Sarah shook her head at a loss. "I don't know. Maybe they were curious. Maybe something in their environment has changed, affecting their behavior. We may never know for sure." As Alcadot, they talked. Sarah noticed other passengers joining them at the railing. Jason and Mia, the teenage siblings, their faces still pale but looking more relaxed than they had in hours. Mark and Linda, the middle-aged couple, holding each other close as they gazed out at the water. "How's Thomas doing?" Sarah asked as Mark and Linda approached. "The medical team says he's stable," Linda replied. "They're treating him for severe hypothermia, but they think he'll make a full recovery. It's a miracle, really." Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They had all made it. Against all odds, they had survived. As the group stood together, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear below the horizon, a sense of shared experience of bonds forged in the face of unimaginable danger settled over them. "I never thought I'd say this," Jason spoke up, breaking the silence. "But I think I've had enough whale watching to last me a lifetime." A ripple of laughter went through the group, tension releasing in a moment of shared humor. Even Sarah found herself smiling, despite the gravity of what they had been through. "I don't know," Mia countered, surprising them all. "I mean, don't get me wrong, I was terrified, but there was something incredible about being that close to them, seeing their power, their intelligence up close. It was, I don't know, life-changing." Sarah looked at the young girl with newfound respect. "You're right, Mia. It was terrifying but also awe-inspiring. Orcas are magnificent creatures. What happened today doesn't change that. If anything, it reminds us of the raw power of nature and the respect we need to have for it. As they continued to talk, sharing their experiences and processing what they had been through, Sarah felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Lieutenant Commander Reeves. "Miss Mitchell, if you're feeling up to it, we need to debrief you on what happened out there. Your account will be crucial for our report and for understanding this unusual orca behavior." Sarah nodded, knowing this was coming. "Of course, I'm ready." As she followed Reeves to the ship's conference room, Sarah glanced back at her passengers. They were still talking, supporting each other, processing their shared trauma. She felt a surge of pride in their resilience, their strength. In the conference room, Sarah found herself facing a panel of Coast Guard officials and marine biologists who had been called in to consult on the incident. For the next 2 hours, she recounted every detail of their ordeal, from the moment they first spotted the orca pod to their dramatic rescue. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a leading orca researcher, leaned forward as Sarah described the juvenile's erratic behavior. "This is fascinating," she mused. "Highly unusual, but not entirely without precedent. There have been rare instances of juvenile orcas displaying overly curious or playful behavior towards boats, but never to this extent." "Could it have been aggression?" Lieutenant Commander Reeves asked. Dr. Rodriguez shook her head. "If it was aggression, none of them would have survived. Orcas are apex predators. If they wanted to attack, it would have been swift and deadly. This sounds more like curiosity gone too far, perhaps exacerbated by environmental factors we're not yet aware of." As the debriefing concluded, Dr. Rodriguez approached Sarah. "Miss Mitchell, your observations are invaluable. Would you be willing to work with our research team in the coming weeks? Your first-hand experience could greatly contribute to our understanding of orca behavior." Sarah hesitated only for a moment before nodding. "Of course. If it can help prevent something like this from happening again, I'm in." As she left the conference room, exhaustion finally catching up with her, Sarah found her passengers waiting for her. They had formed a tight-knit group, bound together by their shared experience. "What happens now?" Emma asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Sarah took a deep breath, looking at each of them in turn. "Now, we rest. We recover. And then, we tell our story. Not to sensationalize what happened, but to educate. To help people understand these incredible creatures better, and to respect the power of the ocean." As the horizon docked, and they prepared to disembark, Sarah knew that their ordeal was far from over. There would be more questions, more debriefings, probably some media attention. The physical and emotional scars would take time to heal. But as she looked at her group, saw the strength and resilience in their eyes, she felt a glimmer of hope. They had faced nature at its most powerful and unpredictable, and they had survived. They had gained a profound respect for the ocean and its creatures, a respect tempered by a healthy dose of caution. As they stepped onto solid ground for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sarah knew that this experience would shape all of their lives moving forward. The memory of those intelligent eyes, the raw power of the orcas, the thin line between life and death, these would stay with them always. And for Sarah, it solidified her commitment to her work. She would continue to share her love of the ocean and its creatures with others, but with a new level of understanding and respect. The events of this day would serve as a constant reminder of the delicate balance between humans and the wild, untamed forces of nature. As they parted ways, promises to keep in touch exchanged, Sarah took one last look out at the water. To the distance, she thought she saw a dorsal fin break the surface before disappearing beneath the waves. A final reminder of the powerful, mysterious world that existed just beyond the shore. The orcas may have returned to their domain, but their impact would ripple through Sarah's life and the lives of her passengers for years to come. This was not the end of their story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter. One marked by a deeper understanding of the awesome, terrifying beauty of the natural world. The soft beep of medical equipment filled the quiet hospital room where Sarah Mitchell sat, her eyes fixed on the still form of Thomas, the elderly passenger from her ill-fated whale-watching tour. It had been 3 days since their harrowing rescue from the waters of Johnston Strait, and while the other passengers had been treated and released, Thomas remained under close observation, his body slowly recovering from severe hypothermia. Sarah reached out and gently patted Thomas's hand. "Hang in there," she whispered. "You're doing great." A soft knock at the door drew her attention. Dr. Amelia Chen, the physician overseeing Thomas's care, entered with a sympathetic smile. "How is he doing?" Sarah asked, standing to greet the doctor. Dr. Chen checked Thomas's vitals before responding. "He's improving steadily. His core temperature is back to normal, and his organs are functioning well. We're just waiting for him to regain full consciousness." Sarah nodded, relief washing over her. "That's good news. I've been so worried about him." "You should be proud, Ms. Mitchell," Dr. Chen said, her tone serious. "Your quick thinking and leadership out there saved his life. Saved all their lives, really." Sarah shook her head, the now familiar feeling of guilt creeping in. "I just did what anyone would have done in that situation." Dr. Chen placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Not everyone would have kept their cool in the face of what you experienced. Give yourself some credit." As the doctor left, Sarah sank back into her chair, her mind drifting back to the events of that day. The memory of the orcas circling their boat, the juveniles' playful yet terrifying behavior, the cold seeping into their bones. It all felt surreal now, like a vivid nightmare she couldn't quite shake. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Emma, the young woman who had been so terrified during their ordeal. "How's Thomas? We're all thinking of him. And you. Coffee later?" Sarah smiled, touched by the concern. The group had formed a tight bond in the days following their rescue, supporting each other as they dealt with the physical and emotional aftermath of their experience. "Thomas is improving. Coffee sounds great. The usual place at 3? After?" Sending her reply, Sarah stood and stretched. She knew she should go home, get some rest, but the thought of leaving Thomas alone didn't sit well with her. Just as she was debating whether to stay longer, she heard a soft groan from the bed. Sarah rushed to Thomas's side, her heart racing. "Thomas, can you hear me?" The elderly man's eyes fluttered open, confusion evident in his gaze. Where am I?" he mumbled, his voice hoarse. "You're in the hospital, Thomas," Sarah said gently, pressing the call button for the nurse. "You're safe now. We all made it." Recognition dawned in Thomas's eyes. "Sarah, the tour guide?" He looked around, panic rising in his voice. "The orcas? Where are the others?" Sarah squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Everyone's okay, Thomas. We were rescued. The others have been treated and released. You gave us quite a scare with your hypothermia, but you're going to be fine." As the medical staff rushed in to check on Thomas, Sarah stepped back, watching as they examined him and explained his condition. The relief she felt at seeing him awake was overwhelming. It was as if a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying had finally lifted. Once the doctors were satisfied with Thomas's condition and had left to contact his family, Sarah approached his bedside again. "Thank you," Thomas said, his eyes watery with emotion. "I remember. You kept talking to me, kept me awake when all I wanted to do was sleep. You saved my life." Sarah felt tears prick at her own eyes. "We all looked out for each other out there. I'm just so glad you're okay." Thomas managed a weak smile. "I've been on a lot of adventures in my life, but I think that one takes the cake. My grandkids are going to have quite the story to hear." Sarah chuckled, marveling at the man's resilience. "Just maybe leave out some of the scarier details for the younger ones, yeah?" As they chatted, Sarah filling Thomas in on what had happened after he lost consciousness, she felt a sense of closure beginning to form. Seeing Thomas awake and on the mend felt like the final piece falling into place. Later that afternoon, Sarah found herself at the local coffee shop, surrounded by the other survivors of their orca encounter. Emma, Jason, Mia, Mark, and Linda had all come, their faces a mix of lingering fatigue and relief. "Thomas is awake," Sarah announced as she sat down, and a collective sigh of relief went through the group. "That's wonderful news," Linda said, squeezing Mark's hand. "I've been so worried about him." Jason leaned forward, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Has anyone heard anything more about why the orcas behave that way? It's all I can think about." Sarah nodded, understanding the teenager's fascination. "I've been in touch with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the ORCA researcher who was at our debriefing. She's put together a team to study what happened. They're looking into everything from changes in the local ecosystem to possible environmental factors that might have affected the orca's behavior. Do they think it could happen again? Mia asked, a hint of fear in her voice. Sarah chose her words carefully. They believe it was an isolated incident. Orcas are generally not aggressive towards humans. What we experienced was extremely rare, but, she added, seeing the skepticism on some faces, they're taking it very seriously. There's talk of implementing new safety protocols for whale-watching tours in the area. The group fell silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Emma was the first to speak up. I keep having nightmares, she admitted quietly. I see those eyes, feel the cold water. I wake up gasping for air. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Sarah felt a pang of guilt. These people had trusted her to keep them safe, and instead, she had led them into a nightmare. I'm so sorry, she began, but Mark cut her off. Don't you dare apologize, Sarah, he said firmly. None of us blame you for what happened. If anything, we're grateful. Your courage and quick thinking saved our lives out there. The others nodded in agreement, and Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Thank you, she managed. I wish I could have done more, prevented it somehow. You couldn't have known, Linda said gently. None of us could have. What matters is how we move forward from here. As they continued to talk, sharing their experiences and the ways they were coping, Sarah was struck by the resilience of the human spirit. These people had faced death, had been terrified beyond measure, and yet here they were, supporting each other, finding strength in their shared experience. The conversation gradually shifted from the trauma of their experience to the awe they had felt in the presence of the orcas. Despite the fear, there was an undeniable sense of wonder at having been so close to these magnificent creatures. I'll never forget the size of them, Jason mused. You see them on TV or at marine parks, but up close, they're just massive. Mia nodded enthusiastically. And their eyes, they seemed so intelligent, like they were really looking at us, you know? Sarah listened, a small smile playing on her lips. This was why she had become a tour guide in the first place, to share the wonder of marine life with others. Despite everything that had happened, that passion hadn't diminished. As the afternoon wore on, the group made plans to meet again. They exchanged phone numbers and promises to stay in touch. Sarah knew that the bonds forged in the face of their shared trauma would likely last a lifetime. After saying her goodbyes, Sarah found herself walking along the harbor, her eyes drawn to the water. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the waves. In the distance, she saw a whale watching boat returning to port, its passengers chattering excitedly about what they had seen. A familiar voice called out to her. Sarah, got a minute? She turned to see Captain Mike Lawson, her boss at Orca Dreams Adventures, approaching. His face was etched with concern. Mike, she greeted him. How are you holding up? He sighed heavily. Been better, to be honest. The company's taking a hit with all this publicity, but never mind that. How are you doing? Really? Sarah considered the question. How was she doing? The nightmares had been intense, the guilt overwhelming at times, but there was something else too. A newfound appreciation for life, for the raw power and beauty of nature. I'm coping, she said finally. It's been tough, but I'm getting there. Mike nodded understandingly. Listen, Sarah, I know this might not be the best time, but I wanted to talk to you about coming back to work. No pressure, of course. Take all the time you need. But when you're ready, well, we'd love to have you back. Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of getting back on a boat, of facing the open water again. But beneath that anxiety was a spark of excitement, a pull she couldn't quite explain. I'll think about it, she said. Thank you, Mike. As Mike walked away, Sarah turned back to the water. A pod of porpoises was playing in the distance, their dorsal fins breaking the surface as they leapt and dove. The sight brought a smile to her face. Over the next few weeks, Sarah threw herself into working with Dr. Rodriguez and her research team. They pored over data, analyzed underwater recordings, and interviewed other tour operators about any unusual orca behavior they might have observed. "It's fascinating," Dr. Rodriguez said one afternoon, as they reviewed footage of the juvenile orca that had caused so much trouble. Its behavior was playful, almost childlike. But the sheer size difference made that play potentially lethal for you and your passengers. Sarah nodded, watching the grainy video of the orca breaching near their boat. It didn't seem aggressive, just curious. Overly so. Dr. Rodriguez made a note in her tablet. "This could revolutionize our understanding of orca behavior. We've always known they're intelligent social creatures, but this level of interaction with humans is unprecedented." As they continued their research, Sarah found herself drawn more and more into the world of marine biology. The terror of her experience was gradually being replaced by a deep fascination with these complex, intelligent animals. One evening, as she was leaving the research facility, she ran into Emma. The young woman looked better than she had in weeks, a healthy glow replacing the pallor that had lingered after their ordeal. "Sarah, I'm so glad I caught you," Emma said, falling into step beside her. "I wanted to tell you, I'm going back to school, to study marine biology." Sarah's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Really? Emma, that's wonderful. What prompted this?" Emma smiled, a hint of her old nervousness creeping in. "Well, believe it or not, it was our experience. I know it was terrifying, but it also opened my eyes to how little we really know about these animals. I want to be part of changing that." Sarah felt a surge of pride and affection for the young woman. "That's incredible, Emma. You're going to do great things, I just know it." As they parted ways, Sarah felt a shift within herself. If Emma could find inspiration in their harrowing experience, could use it as a catalyst for positive change, why couldn't she? The next morning, Sarah found herself standing on the deck of the Orca Dreams Adventures tour boat, her hands gripping the railing tightly. It was her first time back on the water since the incident, and her heart was racing. Mike stood beside her, concern evident in his eyes. "You sure about this, Sarah? There's no shame in needing more time." Sarah took a deep breath, inhaling the salty sea air. "I'm sure," she said, surprised to find that she meant it. "I need to do this." As the boat pulled away from the dock, Sarah felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. The water stretched out before them, vast and mysterious. She knew that somewhere out there, the orcas were going about their lives, unaware of the impact they had had on hers. The tour group gathered around her, life jackets secured and cameras at the ready. Sarah saw the excitement in their eyes, the anticipation of seeing these magnificent creatures in their natural habitat. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice stronger than she had expected. "Welcome to Orca Dreams Adventures. My name is Sarah, and I'll be your guide today as we explore the wonderful world of orcas." As she launched into her usual introduction, explaining the safety procedures and what they might expect to see, Sarah felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged. The tour progressed smoothly, with several orca sightings. That left the passengers in awe. Sarah found herself relaxing, falling back into the rhythm of the job she loved. It wasn't until they encountered a pod of orcas, including a curious juvenile, that Sarah felt her heart rate spike. The memory of their ordeal flashed through her mind. The cold water, the circling fins, the terror. But as she watched the orcas glide gracefully through the water, keeping a respectful distance from the boat, she felt something else too. A deep appreciation for these intelligent, powerful creatures. A renewed sense of wonder at the majesty of the natural world. "Look there," she said to her rapt audience, pointing to where the juvenile orca was playfully slapping its tail against the water. "That behavior is called tail lobbing. It's a form of communication, though we're still learning exactly what they're saying to each other." As she continued to narrate the orca's behavior, drawing on her newfound knowledge from working with Dr. Rodriguez, Sarah realized something profound. Her experience, traumatic as it had been, had given her a unique perspective. She could now share not just facts about orcas, but a deep, personal understanding of their power and complexity. The tour ended without incident, the passengers chattering excitedly as they disembarked. Several of them stopped to thank Sarah personally, commenting on her obvious passion and knowledge. As the last passenger left, Mike approached her, a broad smile on his face. "That was fantastic, Sarah. You haven't lost your touch at all. In fact, I'd say you're even better than before." Sarah felt a warm glow of pride. "Thanks, Mike. It felt good to be back out there." That evening, as Sarah sat on her balcony overlooking the harbor, she reflected on how far she had come. The nightmares had lessened. The guilt had eased. In its place was a newfound respect for the ocean and its inhabitants, a deeper understanding of the delicate balance between humans and nature. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "First day of classes tomorrow. Nervous but excited. Thanks for inspiring me, Sarah." Sarah smiled as she typed her reply. "You're going to do amazing things, Emma. The ocean needs passionate people like you to protect it." As she hit send, Sarah's gaze drifted back to the water. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. In the distance, she saw a splash, perhaps a whale breaching, or maybe just a wave catching the light. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She knew that the memory of their ordeal would always be with her, but now, instead of terror, it filled her with a sense of purpose. She had survived, yes, but more than that, she had grown. She thought of Thomas, now recovered and regaling his grandchildren with carefully edited versions of their adventure. Of Jason and Mia, whose social media was now filled with facts about marine conservation. Of Mark and Linda, who had become advocates for responsible whale-watching practices. And she thought of the orcas, those magnificent, mysterious creatures that had changed her life so profoundly. They were out there now, swimming free in the vast ocean, unaware of the impact they had had on a group of humans who had ventured into their world. Sarah stood stretching as she took one last look at the darkening horizon. Tomorrow would bring another tour, another chance to share her passion and her hard-earned wisdom with others. She was ready for it, eager even. As she turned to go inside, Sarah paused, a small smile playing on her lips. Life, she realized, was a lot like the ocean. Vast, unpredictable, sometimes terrifying, but always, always beautiful. And she was ready to dive back in, with open eyes and an open heart, to see what wonders it might reveal next. The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect conditions for a whale-watching tour. Sarah arrived at the dock early, meticulously checking and rechecking all the safety equipment. Her experience had taught her the value of preparation, of leaving nothing to chance when it came to the unpredictable nature of the sea. As she worked, Dr. Rodriguez appeared on the dock, a folder tucked under her arm. "Sarah, I'm glad I caught you. I have some news about our research." Sarah's interest was immediately piqued. "What have you found?" The marine biologist's eyes gleamed with excitement. "We've been analyzing the underwater acoustics from the day of your incident. There's something unusual in the vocalizations of the juvenile orca that interacted with your boat." Sarah leaned in, intrigued. "Unusual how?" Dr. Rodriguez opened her folder, revealing a series of complex graphs and spectrograms. The juveniles' calls were at a much higher frequency than we typically see in this population. It's almost as if it was, well, for lack of a better term, excited or overstimulated. Sarah furrowed her brow, trying to make sense of the information. Could that explain its behavior, the way it kept approaching our boat? "It's possible," Dr. Rodriguez nodded. "We're still in the early stages of analysis, but this could be a breakthrough in understanding orca communication and behavior. We're considering the possibility that something in your boat's engine frequency might have triggered this response." The implications of this revelation washed over Sarah. Could it be that their terrifying ordeal was the result of a curious, overstimulated juvenile orca responding to unfamiliar sounds? The thought was both fascinating and somewhat relieving. It wasn't aggression, but a form of communication gone awry. "What does this mean for whale-watching tours?" Sarah asked, her mind racing with the potential consequences. Dr. Rodriguez sighed, running a hand through her hair. "That's the million-dollar question. We're recommending a review of all tour boat engines in the area, possibly implementing new guidelines for engine types and operating frequencies. But we need more data, more observations." Sarah nodded slowly, an idea forming in her mind. "I might be able to help with that. I'm heading out on a tour now." If you'd like, I could take some of your recording equipment with me, gather more data on how the orcas respond to our boat. The scientist's face lit up. That would be incredible. Sarah, are you sure you're comfortable with that, given what you've been through? I'm sure, Sarah said, surprising herself with her conviction. If we can learn from what happened, maybe prevent it from happening to someone else, then it's worth it. As Dr. Rodriguez hurried off to gather the necessary equipment, Sarah turned back to her pre-tour preparations, her mind whirling with this new information. She'd always known that orcas were complex, intelligent creatures, but this added a whole new dimension to her understanding. When her tour group arrived, Sarah greeted them with renewed enthusiasm. As she helped them board and went through the safety briefing, she felt a sense of purpose that went beyond her usual love for her job. Today, she wasn't just a tour guide. She was a contributor to important scientific research. As the boat pulled away from the dock, Sarah's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for the telltale signs of orca activity. But this time, instead of apprehension, she felt a thrill of anticipation. What would they discover today? What new insights might they gain into the mysterious world of these magnificent creatures? The ocean stretched out before them, vast and full of possibilities. Sarah took a deep breath of the salty air, a smile playing on her lips. This was more than just another tour. It was the beginning of a new chapter in her relationship with the sea and its inhabitants, and she was ready for whatever adventures it might bring.